Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. Do you ever have those experiences when you're reading and you come across a phrase that just sticks with you for a while? Well, I had that experience as I was studying the last couple weeks. But instead of just a phrase, there was one word that stuck out to me and just kept coming over in my mind and thoughts. And it's probably a word that, if you're J.R. Tolkien, it's one that may be central to a great adventure. J.R. Tolkien once said, "It simply isn't an adventure worth telling if there aren't any dragons." Now, in my family, there's a few dragons we really like. My son loves a young dragon, or I don't know how young, but a young man who finds a dragon and attempts to train it. Another dragon that is kind of a little bit fun for me to be able to read about is a dragon that first is mentioned in The Hobbit as one who has, well, through violent means, obtained a large sum of gold. And in the movie, the first experience you have with it, sleep in a mound of gold. When it is awakened, and maybe after some conversations with the Hobbit, gets a little bit mad and unleashes destruction and its fury on a small town on a lake. Dragons are a fun conversation and can be a metaphor or a symbol for a lot of things. One author noted how our fears are a lot like dragons. And this author is Sarah Ban Breathneck. I don't know if I got that name right. But she noted that dragons are like fears of the unknown, a fear of falling. And by the way, I thought I had a fear of heights, and I keep telling people, I've got a fear of heights. And a friend of mine recently said, no, you don't. You have a fear of falling. It's not the height that you're worried about, but it's falling off from the height. They're probably right. I do have that. There is the fear of starting something new and not finishing. And one that she noted, the author that I hadn't really thought about, was the fear of succeeding. And when she explained to see this, she said, quote, "We might not be happy with the way we are living now, but at least it's safely familiar." For maybe the last week, I've thought about dragons as a metaphor, symbol in my life. We need to keep, as J.R. Tolkien noted, it does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him. Well, if the dragon is our fear, maybe with him or associated with him. So maybe the question for me this week as I've read about dragons is, well, what can we do? What do we do? And how can we overcome our dragons in our lives? Now, this all came about because as I was reading in 2 Nephi chapter 8, Isaiah uses the word dragon. And so let's just start off with that verse and how he describes a dragon and how it can maybe apply to our fears. In verse 9 of 2 Nephi 8, Isaiah starts the verse off with awake. Now, the Hebrew word for awake calls for an action. It calls for a positive response. An effective, righteous action. When it's repeated twice, any word in Hebrew, it is an amplification. It is an emphasis on that. So there's an emphasis from Isaiah that we awake and have a positive reaction, positive response, a positive action. He then says, awake, awake, and put on strength. Now, the put on strength draws from an image and the practice of soldiers that put a sheath on their arms, preparing them for battle. To put on strength is really you're about to do battle with something. And maybe it's fear, it's coming up here in a minute, your dragons. But it also says awake as in the ancient days and gives a couple of references. One is Rahab. Rahab could be referring to an individual, the individual who was a prostitute, who overcame her fears and her lifestyle to join Israel and act in faith. Rahab is also a symbol, could be a symbol for, a mythical experience that happens in different religions. It's a symbol for chaos. It is a symbol, could be a symbol for also Egypt and God's deliverance from Egypt. So the whole verse, just reading it, is awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days, art thou not he, or God, that hath cut Rahab? So cutting through chaos, deliverance out of Egypt, deliverance from even mythical chaos in Canaanite religion. Art thou not he that cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Now, the dragon is a symbol of chaos. It can be a symbol of, Satan is called the dragon, of destruction, something that causes fear. Now, Isaiah also goes on to say, with the awake theme, awake, awake, have an effective righteous action and stand up. Stand up for what you believe in. Stand up for what's right. A lot of imagery you could do is standing up. But also, you're to awake, awake, and put on strength. Now, the strength, put on thy strength, O Zion, and put on thy beautiful garments. That's a great cross-reference for me is Revelation 19:8, where it says, and to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. So there's some symbolism. You put on your righteousness. Putting on thy strength is reference to the priesthood, that Zion should put that on in the last days. And as Joseph Smith taught from the Lord in section 113, verse 8. But really, I love that imagery of beautiful garments. Putting on your righteousness. Anybody who wants to be a member of Zion realizes that they must be pure in heart. Because Zion, really, that is Zion. The pure in heart put on their beautiful garments of righteousness. Isaiah puts a few ways that we can awake and put on the strength and stand up by, number one, looking to our shared legacy of faith. He mentions Sarah and Abraham, who had miracles in their life long past when they thought that they couldn't have children. The fear of not having a promise from God being fulfilled is overcome. Rahab, the wounded dragon, or Isaiah refers to the Exodus coming out of Egypt. He encourages us to awake and put on strength by lifting our eyes to heaven. Don't be so earthbound, is maybe a good way to say it. Focusing on things of here, but focus on things of God. Lift up your eyes to heaven. Don't fear people around you. Don't fear the peer pressure of what they say. Another thing to put on strength that I love, Isaiah mentions, is singing. There is great power in singing righteous, uplifting songs and hymns. He also adds one word, actually starts off chapter 8 by using the word hearken. Now a little bit of an aside. Hearken in Chinese is the word ting. That is the character for ting. And characters in Chinese are made up of mini characters. There's probably a better way of saying it, but just showing you what these little characters are in the character for listening. In the top left, that is a character for the ear. You listen with your ear. And when you listen, you give undivided attention because what somebody is saying or what you're listening to is king. You also have you listen with your eye because that's a focus on what you're listening to. You focus with maximum intensity, maximum interest, because you got the 10 maximum there. And it really is, you're focusing on one thing as you listen. You also listen with your heart. For me, that's a great lesson in hearkening. You listen with your ear and in your heart. You keep your eye on the great King of all. you focus with an active listening attentively with your heart and your mind. To hearken is to listen, to give respectful attention, or give heed to. The thesis maybe in this chapter for me is the way Isaiah starts off the chapter. For him, I think, one way to overcome our fears is to hearken, to pay attention to, be respectful to act on what God says. Follow after righteousness. Seek the Lord, and look to the example of our faithful ancestors. That really is how Isaiah starts off this chapter. A beautiful way to help us overcome our fears, the dragons in our life. Well, thanks for my notes on 2 Nephi chapter 8 or Isaiah 51. See ya. Bye.